Ever wonder how judges make those really, really tough decisions? Especially when, the legal arguments seem to pull in a million different directions. We often have this picture of a purely logical, almost robotic process.
Yeah, like a perfectly calibrated legal machine.
Yeah.
But the reality, well, as our sources reveal, it's far more intricate, more human, actually.
Right.
So for you, our listener, we're taking a deep dive today. We're looking into the fascinating psychology behind how judges, and really all of us, navigate super complex information to finally reach a conclusion.
Okay.
Our mission really is to uncover these surprising cognitive mechanisms, the ones that lead to that feeling of certainty even when everything seems ambiguous. It's kind of a shortcut to understanding the very heart of decision-making.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because before we dive headfirst into the courtroom complexities, maybe we should establish some building blocks, like what is an inference exactly?
Good starting point,
My understanding is it's not just like stating a fact you already know, it's more like taking what you know and figuring out something new from it.
Right. It's exactly right. Think of an inference as, well, it's any cognitive process where your mind goes beyond the data. It has facts, beliefs, texts, whatever,
Uh-huh.
and it generates a new proposition, something that wasn't explicitly there before. It's about adding, new information to your mental representation of things.
Gotcha.
At its most basic, you get a piece of known info, let's call it a datum, and that leads you to a new idea, a proposition. And there's usually a bridge, right? An inference mediator guiding that jump.
Okay, a mediator.
And these mediators, they can be things we recognize, like logical reasoning, deduction, analogy, categorization, or they can be less formal, more like the practical reason you often see in legal settings.
So it's that leap we make from A to B, but maybe not always a perfectly straight logical line.
Not always, no.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here, as you hinted, is how these basic inferences can build up and get strengthened.
Right, there's more to it.
Absolutely.
Right.
This is where Stephen Tolman's model adds a really crucial layer, the backing.
The backing, okay.
Think of it as the ultimate because. So if I infer Harry is a British subject from the datum Harry was born in Bermuda, the inference mediator is something like people born in Bermuda are normally British subjects.
Makes sense.
But the backing is what gives that mediator its teeth. It might be an actual act of parliament, for instance. It's that deeper justification, that authority, that makes the inference persuasive and, importantly, justified, not just a random leap.
Okay, so the backing provides the real weight.
Precisely. And you can imagine, in complex arguments, these aren't just single steps. Inferences often link up, forming chains. One inferred proposition becomes the datum for the next inference, and so on, ultimately having an implication for the final decision. It's like building this chain of reasoning towards a conclusion.
Okay, so if that's how a single inference works, just imagine scaling that up to a whole legal case. I guess some cases are, well, relatively easy, right? Where all the inferences kind of point the same way.
Yeah, in those easy cases, everything lines up, supports the same decision. The judge's job is, let's say, more straightforward.
But then there are the hard cases. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Absolutely. These are the ones where the inferences, if you look at them in isolation, seem to pull in completely different directions. Some support one outcome, others support the opposite, and maybe some are just, well, murky, unclear.
Yeah.
And these are the cases, according to our sources, that really warrant serious examination.
Yeah.
Because they show the gears turning, the real mechanics of how humans decide things under pressure.
It reminds me a bit of making a big life decision. Like, should I take this job offer? You're weighing salary, the commute, the company culture, maybe what happened to a friend who worked there.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. You're making a whole series of inferences. Good salary implies happiness. Bad culture implies stress. Friend's experience predicts mine. And you have to somehow integrate all that conflicting information. That's your own personal hard case scenario right there.
Okay, so judges facing these hard cases, they start with this messy, conflicted picture. What do our sources call that initial state, where everything's kind of jumbled?
They call it a dilemma set. And it's definitely not a neat starting point. A dilemma set is basically the judge's cognitive representation that pulls together all the relevant arguments for a case.
All of them, even the contradictory ones.
Especially the contradictory ones. It's often pervaded by, and this is a quote, profound conflict. It captures that initial feeling of complexity, uncertainty, and, deep conflict within the legal materials themselves.
Okay, a dilemma set. Got it. So let's take these ideas, inference, backing, dilemma set, and see how they play out in a real case. You mentioned Ratzlaff v. United States from 1994.
Yes, exactly. Ratzlaff. It's a great example because it dealt with a pretty technical legal question, not one with huge, obvious ideological battle lines. So the justices were largely acting as, neutral interpreters of the law.
Right, so what was the core issue in Ratzlaff?
Okay, so it all centered on interpreting one word, willfully. It was in a federal law that prohibits structuring cash transactions. Basically, banks have to report cash transactions over $10,000.
Right, to prevent money laundering and stuff.
Exactly. So this guy, Waldemar Ratzlaff, wanted to pay off a gambling debt of over $100,000. Instead of using one check, he went around to 11 different banks and bought multiple cashier's checks, each under $10,000, specifically to avoid that reporting trigger.
Ah, okay. That's the structuring.
That's the structuring. Now, the trial judge convicted him. The judge said, basically, if Ratzlaff knew about the reporting requirement and deliberately acted to avoid it, that was willful enough.
Seems straightforward enough, maybe.
Well, here's the twist. The Supreme Court majority reversed the conviction. They said willfully, in this specific statute, required more. It required special knowledge.
Special knowledge, meaning?
Meaning Ratzlaff had to know not just that he was avoiding the report, but that the act of structuring itself was illegal. A much higher bar.
Wow, okay. That's a significant difference. So how does this Ratzlaff case show that journey you talked about? From the messy dilemma set to a clear conclusion set.
It illustrates it perfectly. The sources break down the initial dilemma set for the justices. It revolved around about 6 main issues, including interpreting willfulness, figuring out legislative intent, things like that. Just on the legislative intent piece alone, there were apparently something like 23 distinct arguments drawn from 10 different authoritative sources, committee reports, statutes, prior cases. And crucially, these arguments often pointed in completely opposite directions, supported rival conclusions.
So the initial state was genuinely complex. Contradictory.
Absolutely. Fraught with complexity and contradiction is how the analysis puts it. A real legal knot.
Okay, so that's the before picture. What about the after, the final opinions?
That's where the contrast is so stark. When you read the final majority opinion and the dissenting opinion, both of them present what our sources call an absolutely coherent set of arguments.
Absolutely coherent, meaning?
Meaning, within each opinion, all the inferences presented seem to logically support their chosen decision. There's no hint of that initial conflict or ambiguity left. It's like the case evolved dramatically, moving from that messy dilemma set to a state of complete closure and certainty for each side.
Wow. So the really big question becomes, how? How does a judge's mind actually do that? Go from this tangled web of conflict to such, well, black and white coherence?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the answer lies in understanding that the mind isn't just passively absorbing information, it's actively working on it.
Actively? How so?
Well, research shows that people, and judges are people, actually modify their inferences during the decision-making process. They tweak things, subtly or not so subtly, to maximize the overall coherence of the picture they're building.
Wait, so they change how they see the arguments as they go along?
In essence, yes. Their final decisions are ultimately determined by these modified, more coherent inferences, not necessarily the raw, conflicting ones they started with. It's a process of cognitive change, driven by what psychologists call coherence maximization. The mind strives for a story that makes sense, that hangs together.
Okay, the mind wants coherence, but if you start with profound contradictions, how does it actually get there? It sounds like some serious mental gymnastics.
It is, and it's not usually a neat linear calculation. It's better explained by ideas like connectionist systems and mental model building.
Mental model building, like constructing a little simulation in your head.
Kind of. Judges seem to construct tentative mental models of the case. These models represent the legal propositions and how they're linked by inferences. Then they sort of run these models mentally. They test them for coherence. How well does this story hold up? And they retain or revise the parts of the model that seem to increase that coherence. But what's really fascinating is this oscillation phenomenon.
Oscillation?
Yeah. Throughout the process, the judge isn't just working on one model. They actually develop 2 competing models, one for each potential decision alternative. Say, one model for ruling for the plaintiff, one for the defendant.
Okay, 2 competing stories.
Right. And their attention literally oscillates between these 2 models. Think of that classic optical illusion, the Necker cube.
Oh yeah, the cube you can see facing 2 different ways.
Exactly. You can see it one way or the other way, but it's really hard to see both clearly at the exact same time. When the judge focuses on one mental model, Its supporting arguments become overwhelmingly salient, they seem incredibly coherent, and the arguments for the other model get sort of suppressed, pushed into the background.
So you flip-flop mentally until one side just feels stronger, more solid.
Pretty much. The process continues, maximizing the coherence of whichever model is currently in focus until some kind of stopping criterion is met. Maybe they reach a point they feel is maximum possible coherence, or maybe it's more like satisficing.
Satisfacing.
Yeah, stopping once a sufficient level of coherence is achieved. Maybe time is running out, or maybe it just feels right, like they've found the answer, even if it's not perfectly mathematically coherent.
That Necker cube analogy is powerful, seeing only one coherent picture at a time. But how does the mind actually do the restructuring? What are the specific cognitive tools or transformations it uses to smooth out those conflicts?
Right, it's not magic. Our sources identify three main mechanisms, three types of cognitive restructuring judges seem to employ, often unconsciously. They call them gatekeeping, bolstering, and rule selection.
Gatekeeping, bolstering, rule selection. Okay, let's break those down. Gatekeeping sounds pretty active, like controlling what gets in.
It is very active. Gatekeeping involves selectively including or excluding certain propositions, arguments, or facts from consideration. It's also about framing the case, presenting the narrative in a particular light from the outset.
Can you give an example from Ratzlaff?
Sure. In the Ratzlaff majority opinion, they tended to downplay or even omit details about Ratzlaff's active role in figuring out how to do the structuring. He was portrayed a bit more passively, which made it easier to argue he didn't have criminal knowledge.
Ah, okay.
The dissent, on the other hand, they highlighted those very active steps to paint a picture of someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Both sides also strategically included or excluded bits from legislative reports, choosing the quotes or sections that supported their view and kind of ignoring the ones that didn't, even though they knew they existed.
So it's not necessarily lying, but it's definitely selective presentation, like a director choosing which scenes make the final cut.
That's a great way to put it. It's about controlling the information flow into the coherent model being built.
Okay, what about the second one? Bolstering.
Bolstering is a bit more moderate, maybe. It's less about wholesale inclusion or exclusion and more about emphasizing certain features of an argument or piece of evidence while de-emphasizing others. Essentially, you reinterpret things slightly to make them fit your emerging narrative better.
So tweaking the interpretation?
Exactly. Justice Cardozo, a very famous judge, once candidly noted that a judge must permit himself a certain margin of misstatement. It sounds bad, but he meant this kind of subtle reshaping. And the legal scholar Carl Llewellyn, he actually documented, get this, 64 techniques judges use just to handle precedent past cases.
64, wow.
Yeah. Techniques ranging from faithfully following a precedent to expanding it, avoiding it, distinguishing it, saying this case is different, or even effectively killing it off. It shows just how much interpretive flexibility is built into the system.
So how did bolstering play out in Ratzlaff?
Well, the justices looked at the very same 1986 Senate report, but interpreted it quite differently. They bolstered their readings by focusing on different phrases, arguing about the grammatical significance of things, like the phrase "in addition," all to make the report seem to support their respective conclusions about what willfully meant. Same text, different emphasis, different result.
Okay, that makes sense. It's subtle but powerful. And the last one, rule selection.
Rule selection is about choosing which interpretive rule or principle to apply when multiple, often competing rules could potentially fit.
Like choosing which tool to use.
Yeah, exactly. Think about those contradictory proverbs we have, like many hands make light work versus too many cooks spoil the broth.
Yeah, right.
We tend to pull out the one that conveniently supports whatever point we're trying to make at the moment, don't we? Often without even thinking about it.
Guilty as charged. So judges do that too, but with legal rules.
Essentially, yes. Llewellyn, again, famously found 28 pairs of opposing canons rules of statutory interpretation. He called them thrust and parry rules, noting that for almost any rule there was an opposing one a judge could choose instead.
That's incredible.
And the Ratzlaff opinions were a perfect example. The majority argued strongly for a contextual interpretation, looking at the broader purpose and context of the law. The dissent, meanwhile, championed a textual interpretation, sticking very strictly to the literal words of the statute. Two different valid approaches leading to opposite conclusions.
So gatekeeping, bolstering, rule selection. These are the mental maneuvers happening behind the scenes.
Right. And what's crucial to remember is that our sources suggest these processes aren't typically about judges being deliberately deceptive or manipulative. It's more like the mind's inherent, often unconscious, way of wrestling with ambiguity and conflict to construct a narrative that feels coherent and justifiable.
It sounds like this incredibly complex, almost invisible mental dance is happening, but are the judges themselves even aware of it? Aware that they're gatekeeping, bolstering, selecting rules in this way?
That's one of the most striking findings. Generally, no. Psychological research consistently shows that people are largely unaware of the cognitive restructuring going on in their own minds as they make decisions.
Really? Unaware.
Yeah. They don't consciously notice their inferences shifting or their interpretations changing. In fact, people often struggle to recall their original beliefs or assessments before the decision process started. They tend to misremember them as being consistent with their final conclusion all along.
Wow. So the memory itself gets revised.
It seems so. And this lack of awareness is crucial because it preserves the feeling, the perception that the legal materials themselves, the statutes, the precedents, remained unchanged and objective throughout the process. It masks the subjective mental transformations that occurred. Our sources call this the illusion of objectivity.
The illusion of objectivity. Because the judge feels objective even while their mind is actively shaping the arguments.
Precisely. They feel constrained by the law as they now perceive it after the coherence building process is complete.
So if this whole restructuring process is largely unconscious, how do judges describe how they reach their decisions? Especially in those really tough cases. They can't say, well, my connectionist network settled into a stable state.
No, definitely not. They often resort to describing it as a hunch.
A hunch, like a gut feeling.
Sort of, but it's more nuanced than just a random guess. Judges are usually very aware of the content of their decision, what they decided, and they feel incredibly confident about it. But they often have very limited conscious access to the intricate process that led them there.
So the answer feels obvious, but they can't quite explain why it's obvious.
Exactly. The conclusion feels obvious, yet somehow inexplicable. William James, the great psychologist, put it beautifully. When the conclusion is there, we have always forgotten most of the steps preceding its attainment.
Forgotten the steps.
Yeah. Another judge, Judge Hutchison, described it vividly as that intuitive flash of understanding which makes the jump spark connection between question and decision. And Justice Cardozo used that wonderful metaphor of clarity emerging, like the fog filling from the obscured problem.
Like the answer just crystallizes out of the confusion.
Right. So the hunch isn't necessarily unprincipled or arbitrary. It's often a judge's honest, candid description of experiencing a genuine feeling of certainty that arises from all this complex, demanding, but largely unconscious cognitive work. It explains why judges can express such remarkably high levels of confidence even when the initial data, the dilemma set, was riddled with conflict. They feel the coherence they've constructed.
Okay, so the judge arrives at this point of deep, felt certainty, this coherent conclusion, largely through these unconscious processes. How does that internal state then translate into the formal judicial opinions we actually read? Those seem so structured, so logical.
That's a key point. Those opinions are essentially snapshots. They aren't a diary of the messy, back-and-forth, oscillating decision process.
Yeah. Right, not the raw footage.
Exactly. They're the polished, final image of the coherent mental model after the decision has been reached. The opinion articulates the reasons that the judge, now in that state of coherence, perceives as best supporting the decision.
And sometimes maybe they even add more reasons after the fact.
Yes, that happens too. There's often a post-decision process of rationalization. Once the choice is made, the judge or their clerks might actively seek out additional information, more precedents, stronger quotes, or authoritative texts to further bolster the chosen conclusion. This padding, as the sources call it, makes the final opinion appear even more coherent, almost inevitable, and singularly correct.
So it's like building an even stronger case after the internal verdict is already in.
In a way, yes.
Oh.
And crucially, the opinion embodies the chosen mental model. It champions that model's arguments and actively ignores, downplays, or refutes the arguments that supported the rejected alternative model.
Ah, because they're only seeing one side of the Necker cube clearly by then.
Precisely. That deep discrepancy between the two competing models, the intense conflict of the initial dilemma set, is never really confronted simultaneously in the final written opinion. This selective focus contributes significantly to that confident, sometimes unshakable tone you often find in judicial writing.
This whole perspective, it really sheds light on that long-standing debate in legal theory, doesn't it? Between legal formalism, the idea that judges just find or discover the law, and legal realism, the idea that they actively create or make law.
It absolutely does. This psychological model offers a kind of bridge, suggesting that judges can genuinely feel constrained by the law. They can truly experience finding the right answer within the legal materials because they are constrained by the coherent mental model they have constructed.
Even if that model itself was shaped by unconscious processes like gatekeeping and bolstering.
Exactly. So their subjective experience of certainty, their feeling of simply applying the objective law, isn't necessarily a conscious deception or mere rhetoric. It can be a genuine psychological artifact of achieving that state of cognitive coherence. The law feels clear and constraining once the mind has done the work to make it so.
So while we should read opinions knowing they might be padded or present a selective picture,
They still remain incredibly valuable sources of data. They show us the end state of that reasoning process, and often the judge's private need for internal consistency aligns pretty well with the public need for a justifiable, consistent legal ruling. So the reasons given aren't just random justifications, they reflect what became coherent for the judge.
wow, what a journey we've taken today, seriously. From the basic idea of an inference all the way up to the complex, conflicting dilemma set of a Supreme Court case like Ratzlaff. We've seen how the judicial mind isn't passive, but actively restructures information, often unconsciously, to arrive at a decision that feels powerfully coherent.
Yeah, exploring those mechanisms, the gatekeeping, the bolstering, the rule selection, it really changes how you think about legal reasoning.
Absolutely. And understanding the hunch, not as some random guess, but as this genuine feeling of certainty that emerges from deep, often hidden cognitive work. It's fascinating.
It really is. And maybe this raises an important final thought for you, the listener, to consider. If even judges, people who are actively striving for objectivity and trained in logical reasoning, are so profoundly influenced by these deep-seated cognitive drives for coherence, how might understanding this psychology change the way you approach and evaluate complex decisions in your own life?
Mm.
What hidden conflicting dilemma sets might you be wrestling with right now? And how might your own mind be unconsciously gatekeeping, bolstering, and selecting rules to construct its own seemingly obvious conclusion sets, maybe without you even fully realizing it? Something to think about.